Welcome back, everyone. We are now at episodes 5 and 6 of the Hulu series Mike. Just before we get started, if you like the content, please like and subscribe, and also check out our reviews on the previous episodes in the Mike series. And also, if you're a House of the Dragon fan, please check in with us every Monday for reviews of that show. But getting back to where we are at now, this episode, number 5, undoubtedly will be the most polarizing and controversial episode of the series, and probably the most poignant of everything that's been done so far, even with the half an hour runtime. So a lot of you know that before this series aired, Mike Tyson was vehemently against it. He claimed that they stole his story. He claimed that it was like a slave master's version of his life and everything. And when I heard that, I kind of thought it was mostly because they were making a fictionalized account of his story without his participation, number one, and that he was not getting compensated for it. But what I'm thinking now is he probably got wind of how this, or heard the feedback of this episode 5 entitled Desiree, and that's what really set him off because if you don't know the story and you watch this episode, you will come away with thinking that Mike is a monster and a rapist. So let's get right into how they depicted this monumental event in Tyson's life and also Desiree's life. So for those of you who don't know, Desiree Washington was the woman that accused Mike Tyson of raping her back in 1991 in his hotel room. She was a beauty pageant contestant, 18 years old. They went to trial and she testified. He was convicted and served 3 years in prison. He was locked up from 91 until I believe about late 94, which at that point he came out in his 30s and resumed his boxing career. Desiree Washington always maintained her story, never got any money for selling her story or doing any interviews. She did one interview, I believe, with Barbara Walters initially after the conviction, and then faded from the spotlight. And to this day, 30 years later, she's pretty much kept out of the spotlight. I don't know if she's changed her name or not, but she hasn't popped up anywhere nor changed her story. So when this came about the big question is how are they going to depict it? Because Mike has maintained his innocence. Even to this day, if you bring up the fact that he's a convicted rapist, he will go off, he'll curse you out, threaten to beat you up. There's that famous interview that happened on a morning talk show in Toronto where he went off on the guest for calling him a rapist. Even in his one-man show has said it's complete lies. So it's basically a he said, she said situation. And then you have to decide who's more credible, whose evidence that was presented leans more towards the other. So I thought going in that they were probably going to do something like have them go to the hotel room, the door closes, and then we're only going to see the aftermath. And then you make the decision based on both of their accounts, who's telling the truth. But they completely flipped that. What they've done is something that no one else has done, and they put you in Desiree's shoes. You are essentially, she replaces Mike Tyson as the main character in this episode, and you're hearing everything from her perspective. She's talking to you directly as the audience. And that was a masterful thing because it really even if you weren't rooting for Mike, you get some affinity for the main character and his journey. So now you're taken out of that and you're seeing the effects of what his decisions did to this young woman and how what society did to this young woman. So just to start, I already said she's 18 years old, not even started college yet. So keep that in mind. Just graduated high school. She's in a beauty pageant. She has these grand dreams, very wide-eyed, bushy tail, bubbly. I have all these dreams of all these things she can accomplish. She's hoping to be Miss Black America, has the whole talented 10th type of motif of I'm going to uplift the race and be a credit to Black people. I'm going to be such a role model. Had all these dreams going on. And you can just hear when she's talking with her roommate and everything, you can tell how young that young naivety that you have when you're 18 years old. When she's talking and they're having their discussions about their dreams in the hotel room, and when I'm staying in the hotel room, talking about her roommate before even Tyson came in the picture. You can tell that they're young girls. I mean, essentially, they sound like high school students because they're not far removed from high school. So that already lets you know that this whole idea of her having like real world experience and being a grown woman that you kind of heard a lot during the trial. This is a complete opposite of that. You're basically seeing a girl who is just getting started in the world and trying to find herself. And when you get to the pageant, when they're all out there practicing and everything, Mike Tyson comes in the room and literally all the women go running up to him. They're fawning over him, almost worshiping the ground that he walks on. And of course, Tyson's eating it up. He's looking at them and sizing them up as if they're meat. And this is not surprising because we've seen in the previous episodes, this episode with Robin, all of his interactions with women, they've pretty much been there, on a whim for his desire. So you're already seeing, things that this is not a good setup off the bat. So he gets close to Desiree. He takes a liking to her, asks for her number. She gives her number. He calls her about after 1:30 at late at night. She's in her bed in her rollers. Her roommate answers the phone, says, "Hey, it's Mike Tyson. Hurry up, we'll get you ready and everything. He's gonna take you out." And she's thinking she's gonna go out to some nice after party and they're gonna talk and get to know each other and all that. And this is again from the mind of a young 18-year-old girl, no real world experience. One of the things we heard during the trial a lot, and what I heard, I was very young when this trial actually happened. I would hear some adults saying, "Well, what did she think was going to happen?" Going to a man's, hotel room at 1:30 in the morning. So this is showing you the different perspective of what she may have been thinking as a young girl with none of that grown woman experience about knowing what was up. So she's thinking they're going out, and she mentions that when they go out to the hotel room, he told her that they were just going up there to grab something real quick, and then they were going to go out. But of course, when they go up to the hotel room, Mike is like, "Just come in the bedroom with me for a minute. Let's just talk. I want to talk." He lays on the bed. She sits in the chair. They're having small talk. And then he just flat out says, "What's up with you? I'm trying to smash." And she's like, "I'm not that type of girl. I don't do one night stands." She's looking uncomfortable. She goes in the bathroom and she does, it seems like, she takes her pad off. I think she's having a period. So she takes it off, I guess because she's conflicted about whether to go through with it or not. So they do kind of put that in there, a little bit of gray area. But when she does come out of the hotel room, she's narrating this. She's telling you that she told him to stop, and it's going back and forth between her there and then later the courtroom appearance where she's giving her testimony, and she says a line that he repeated over and over again is, "Don't fight me, just relax." So there's no cutaway, so you're seeing everything that's happening, her struggling, him holding her down, pushing her down. And as far as the actual rape, you don't get to see both of them together as far as him violating her, but you see her face and you see the bed moving and her in obvious discomfort and pain and not wanting it. So it really hits you home. I mean, there's no way you can watch this and not be on her side essentially, because this is from her perspective and everything that went on in her mind. And you see this big contrast of how excited and happy she was, the Desiree before this incident, and then immediately after you see her at the hospital with her parents and she has like dead eyes. Her spirit is like completely gone, and she's almost monotone saying that, "I'm here to report that I've been raped." And they put in a lot of historical notes from this situation. One of the most poignant is the fact that the doctor that examined her, he mentioned that she has abrasions in her vaginal area, and these are the only abrasions as a doctor that he's seen in rape cases. He's like, and if you look up the testimony that that doctor gave, he said that in 30% roughly of rape victims, he sees these type of abrasions in the vaginal area, and that he's never seen these in situations where there's been consensual sex. So that was a very damning testimony from that doctor that examined her immediately after. One thing that they didn't include, if you do take the chance to look up the case and what happened, uh, Tyson's limousine driver, who was a woman, I believe her name was Virginia, I think Virginia Foster. She testified for the prosecution, stating that when Desiree came down from the hotel room, or initially when she went up, she looked fine, was happy and everything. But when she came back to the car, she was disheveled. She looked shocked. She was muttering to herself, like, "Who does he think he is? How can he do this?" So that kind of led credence to the fact that something bad happened up there even though that limousine driver wasn't present. So this whole entire episode is from her perspective. We get in, one of the other things that they touched on is the community response to Desiree. And her parents let her know off the bat that you're not going to get a lot of support in the Black community. There's going to be a lot of people against us. And then they show the different people out on the street that said she should have known better. One of the most damning ones actually comes from the Nation of Islam and Minister Louis Farrakhan. They actually include a quote from him that I've never heard before. I actually had to look it up, where he says that as far as what happened, you bring a hawk to the chicken yard and then wonder why the chicken gets eaten up. And the chicken meaning Desiree. And he goes on this long diatribe about women setting men up. How many times do women say no when they mean yes? We're not tolerating that anymore. It's very vile to hear that, and but it shows you what happens when cases like this go down. Doesn't become about the people anymore. It becomes about the overall historical narrative that goes behind these cases. Because we know in this country, one of the most perverse ideas of racism is the fact that this whole black brute stereotype, black men can't control themselves. They're just, libacious and rapists. A lot of black men were lynched throughout history behind that. So a lot of that ties into this as well, because a lot of people looked at this as like a legal lynching. And that's kind of the perspective that Farrakhan went behind when he's going off in this diatribe in this show, on this show depiction. However, when you look at the actual case with Desiree and Tyson, this is totally outside of that. It really should be analyzed, the evidence between those two and what happened. Because Desiree was an 18-year-old girl. So, you watching this, there's nothing incendiary about her as far as trying to set him up or anything. So that kind of narrative falls apart when you look at the particular people involved. But that, gets lost when, things become public and you're dealing with public figures. So she's fighting against all of that. And then you also had the backdrop of what happened with Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas, and some of that is referenced as well. So they tell her because initially she wants to be anonymous and report this, but the her lawyer tells her that no, you have to testify. If we see this through, you have to be public. And she decides to do that. And really her main reason for doing that is because she says she was afraid of him doing this to other women. So you have the testimony, she's giving her part and everything. And then Tyson's lawyer, they kind of feed into that black brute stereotype, but also to kind of liberate him or show his innocence. And they say that, Tyson, he loves women, he loves having, random sexual encounters, but, he made that clear from the jump. So it wasn't like you were going up there and not knowing what was going on. That was his legal team's argument. And he actually got up on the stand, terrible witness, he was just very cavalier. He was talking about it matter of factly, the whole incident, the same way you might talk about how you poured yourself a cup of coffee. Just no empathy for the human element involved or how things may have gone awry. He just basically said, I called her up there. I told her I wanted to fuck her. Maybe if I would have walked her down to the car afterward, maybe she would have felt better about how things went down. Maybe she wouldn't have felt less used. So really just very callous. And you can imagine, a jury that has any women on there, how they're going to look at that. And, I do remember that from the original trial that Tyson was very cavalier. I don't remember any testimony, but there is an image that all of you will probably have seen before where he's walking into the courtroom with the handcuffs on and he puts his hands up and kind of does a little shimmy like it's a joke. So you can tell, that's not going to endear you to the jury. So his testimony was really had the opposite effect. So he gets convicted. And they show Desiree having her one last interview with Barbara Walters, talking about how she pitied him and how that she hopes he gets help because the people around him, are not there to help him. And this is what led him to this situation. And I want to say one thing about fame in general. We always hear the idea that fame changes you, but the reality is fame just really amplifies who you really are and just gives you more leeway to act out on the type of person that you are. And if you haven't done the work to improve yourself or work on your big flaws, all of that is going to come out with that money and fame just on the bigger stage. And that's essentially what happened with Tyson. No matter what you think about the verdict or what may have happened, his track record with women was never good, and it all kind of led up to this breaking point, unfortunately. And it was a rough one to get through, even for it just being 30 minutes. So very controversial. I definitely want to hear what, all the women may think. Anybody in general, does this change your opinion on Mike Tyson? Or do you feel like you've always kind of had the same opinion that we'll never know because weren't in the room? But this is the first time I've actually seen anybody really try to get Desiree's perspective on this. And you got to wonder how she feels about it. She's still out there somewhere. I'm pretty sure she may have heard about this series. We know because it's been 30 years, Mike's reputation now is kind of like a lovable, affable guy to a degree, even though we kind of know that the old Mike is still under there and can come out in certain instances. But because it's been so long, people have kind of don't look at him the same way as if this, let's say this happened 10 years ago or 5 years ago or within the midst of the Me Too movement. He might have never been able to have that redemption arc that he's going through in his later years. So very polarizing episode. And now I kind of understand why Mike was so adamant and against this coming out. Because again, there is no way you can not watch this episode and almost not come away with thinking that Tyson was a rapist and deserved to be in jail. So that's episode 5. So now going to episode 6. Now he's locked up, 25 years old, in the prime of his life, going to be locked up for 6 years, and not going to come out until on the other side of 30. And with his type of style, most of those swarming type of boxers don't have long careers. Normally, once they get on the other side of 30, they're on the downside. So now you're inside, no training opportunities. Your body's going to get flabby. Your mind is also going to get flabby. What is he going to do? And one of the main things I also wanted to point out about prison is that, time stands still for you while you're locked up. When you're locked up, close to a decade, 5 years, even 2 or 3 years, everything keeps moving while you stay stagnant. So you always hear those stories about people coming out of prison, and it's almost like a culture shock. Even just I've heard stories about even people who have been in prison for a long time getting in a car. It's almost uncomfortable just the way the car, it feels like they're speeding and going too fast because they're not used to, they haven't been in a car for years. So even little things like that are a shock. So you can imagine how it can be for somebody who might have been locked up 6, 10 years. So while he's locked up, of course, he's angry. He's getting in fights because some people are, trying to taunt him and try him, calling him a rapist and everything. He shuts that down very quickly, beating on a few people. He tries to punk his cellmate, a guy named Ray Ray, who they don't say how long he's been there, but he's been there a while, and he's making it his mission to try and open up Mike's mind because he still sees, people looked at Mike as a hero, somebody that came out of the gutter and made something of themselves, and then to see him fall like this, they want to see him get back up. Ray Ray doesn't want to see him stay in prison. So the main thing he tells Mike, you need to start reading these books. And eventually after getting in, throwing in the hole and having all these fights, he eventually starts warming up to Ray, starts reading, starts making contacts, but in classic Mike fashion, he starts using this for for bad means. His commissary gets filled up with people donating money to him and all that. So he uses that to run a racket in prison and start running the prison. He gets guards on his side. He's getting free donuts, gets a TV in his room. He's selling porn, cigarettes, food. So Mike is basically, you can't call him the Godfather because he's in prison. I guess you can call him the Yard Father, because basically he's running the yard at this point. And it gets to the point where he's even selling contraband while he's in the mosque, the mosque that they have in prison, the little worship area. Now, the Muslims don't say anything to him while he's doing this, but they're watching him. They're going about their prayers, still saying, still staying pious and on their deen. But while, Mike is starting to kind of pay attention to them a little bit because he's used to people either cowering away from him or just submitting to his will, so to speak, and being under him. So eventually he starts having a conversation with the imam. And the imam, for those who don't know, is the word for teacher, kind of like a minister in Islamic culture. So they start having talks and everything, and he starts breaking through the Mike about the importance of getting his mind right, praying, and in this series, we've never seen Mike pray before. So this is the kind of the first time that we see him trying to connect to a higher power or higher spirituality. So he gets out of prison. only does about th 3 years. And it's funny because while he's locked up, his guy Ray Ray, they get him sent to the Supermax. So and that makes you kind of wonder, and they don't touch on this too much, but they make you wonder if the powers that be, whether they wanted Mike to relapse in there and do something to increase his prison sentence. So once they saw him starting to get civilized and work with somebody that had his best interests at heart, they take that person away from him. So they didn't touch on that too much. As far as like overarching political powers against, against him, they focused more so on just the Black community in general. The famous, mid-90s crime bill. They don't talk about that by name too much, but they talk about in the 90s in general, you started having those, mandatory minimum sentences and what that did, to Black men in the Black community. They talked about people with, small amounts of drugs and everything getting mandatory 20-year sentences, while people in the suburbs who got caught with drugs and all that, they got treatment and ways to rehabilitate themselves without losing half of their, lives to prison. So they did touch on that a little bit to kind of uh, show the contrast or kind of show the analogy of, or the parallel, excuse me, of what was happening with Mike and his prison sentence. So once he gets out, Don King is right there with him. Well, before I even go into that, Maya Angelou does visit him briefly in prison, and I never got to read exactly what they talked about or heard Mike's perspective on that. But essentially, while she was there, she was telling him that, you get to choose who you want to be, and you can change the narrative, and you can transform yourself in here. So when you get out, you're a totally new person. And I feel like they should have mentioned something about, Maya Angelou, she was raped when she was a child. And it traumatized her so much that she stopped speaking for, I believe, a couple of years. This happened when she was 7 years old. So the fact that you have a former rape victim that still sees light in him and is still willing to help him, that is something right there. So I think they could have touched on that a little bit, but I think, they may not have known how to go about kind of incorporating that without feeling exploitive, so to speak. So they didn't mention anything about Miss Angelou's background, but it was, cool seeing them together. But Mike is still Mike. So she actually took a picture with him, a Polaroid, so he can keep as a namesake and to kind of keep him, on the right and narrow while he's in this cell. And Mike goes off and sells it to somebody else in the prison for $50. So he doesn't even have the picture anymore. So classic Mike, one step forward, two steps back. So once he gets out of prison, he's back with Don King. And that's kind of where the episode ends. He doesn't, he's not back in the ring training yet. He's really just outside the prison and trying to get acclimated. They do have one cool moment with a character named Captain Joe, who's a NOI guy that was working under Don King. And Don King got a little attitude for whatever reason. He didn't want to eat bean pies at that moment that they were eating. He's like, make me some pork. And he throws the pork at Captain Joe, in the kitchen area. And Captain Joe's like, I don't touch pork, and you know that. And then Donald's like, well, you're fired. Captain Joe kind of looks at him, doesn't make a scene, kind of gives Mike a pat on the back and leaves. Later on that night, Captain Joe is back with the NOI soldiers. For those of you who don't know, that's the FOI, which is the Fruit of Islam. They're out there with guns and all that. And they tell Don, you don't fire Captain Joe. He works here for as long as he wants, and that kind of shut Don King down. So I don't remember that story or remember anything about Captain Joe, but I think they're alluding to the fact that when Don King was working with Muhammad Ali, very late in Muhammad Ali's career, really during his last fight, which happened not even here in the States, it happened in the Bahamas. There were some issues going on with Don King. He got out of line, and the Muslim brothers beat him up, like beat him up badly to the point where he left the island. Like they told him after they beat him up, you stay here, you might not make it off this island. So he flew back, I believe, to Florida, and he was out of the promotion after that. So I think they were kind of alluding to that kind of contentious history that Don King had with the Nation of Islam, meaning that he was tolerated, but anytime he got out of line, they got him straight relatively quickly. So I guess the fact that now that Tyson is with the NOI, with as a new champion, the same rules still apply to Don that you don't get out of line with us when we're here working with the champ. So we got two more episodes left, and it's going to focus on Tyson's last act, which is going to be him regaining the title. losing the title to Evander Holyfield, the suspension with the bite, and then the closing chapter, the big loss to Lennox Lewis, and the final losses to subpar fighters before his career closed. And then the final act, as far as the Tyson that we know now, kind of the media maven, so to speak. So definitely, I want to hear your feedback on this. I thought it was great. I really thought it was ambitious and very daring to give a whole episode dedicated, not necessarily to the rape case, but Desiree's perspective. We have not seen that so far. So whatever side you fall on, I think it was at least illuminating to hear what her perspective may have been as an 18-year-old meeting a heavyweight champion that was, 25 years old, older than her, worldly, had women at his disposal, and how things could have just went off the rails. And yeah, so but I also know why Mike is upset because like I said, once you watch this episode, it's going to be hard not to come away not thinking he deserved to be in prison, if not longer. And one other thing I wanted to leave you with, Tyson, I mentioned, has to this day completely maintained his innocence with the rape conviction. But he did say one thing in one of his many documentaries over the years. He did state that while he was innocent of that, he's done much worse things in his life that he was able to get away with. So in a sense, he thinks this may have been kind of his comeuppance for all the other crimes that he got away with. So I just want you to think for a moment, if he did something worse than this, because for most of us, there's not anything worse than violating a woman like that. A lot of us will think that's even worse than murdering somebody. So if he's done worse things and got away with it, just kind of imagine in your mind of what that could have been. So, two more episodes left with the legendary heavyweight champion, Mike Tyson. I believe those episodes will be airing next Thursday. So make sure to be back here next Thursday. We'll do our final review of those two episodes. And also, like I mentioned before, if you are a House of the Dragon fan, make sure you like and subscribe as we drop reviews on that show every Monday. And if there's any other shows out there you want me to take a stab at, please let me know because I am looking for some new shows to dive into for the remainder of 2022. Take care, everyone, and I will see you next week.